because I can find it. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unheard Outsider. I'm your host today, Q. If you don't know me, I'm the Assistant Director to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Center here at South Puget Sound Community College. This is part two to our first episode dropping in regards to unpacking women of color mental health and really getting to how do we continue to understand women of color choosing to take care of their mental health and why so, given all of the components that women of color particularly have to face in different institutions and just being a woman of color existing as well. And today we have my wonderful sister friend here in the room, and I want her to just introduce herself. Welcome to the show and introduce yourself to the people. Let us know who you are, who you be.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Q, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Always a good opportunity to reconnect with you. My name is Sade Adiayo. I am a mental health clinician. I support families. I support individuals. I support folks struggling with substance use disorder. And sort of everything in between. But most of all, and first of all, I stand in the world as a Black woman. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you because I bring that identity into my work, into my work as a clinician, as a former social policy researcher, and as someone who advocates for the well-being of families, particularly here in the DMV.
Thank you. Well, my first question is, what made you want to go into therapy and mentoring? Where did that come from for you to really want to give back to supporting particularly people of color or people in general in their mental health journey?
Sure. I mean, I think I've always been in that space or that lane, if you will. If you talk to a lot of clinicians, as I talk to a lot of my friends and family in this space, we kind of always were interested in this, even at a young age, sort of being identified as the go-to person or the person that was deemed trustworthy or just a safe space. I love the idea of being a safe space for other people. It also came from a very personal place. I struggled with a lot of displacement when I was younger. And that level of instability obviously impacted me as a whole person and not just needing physical space to think clearly and to just sort of operate in my purpose. So I started to, at a very young age, get very concerned and curious about emotional and mental health and what does that mean. So I just read, I had a thirst for knowledge, of course, and just read a lot of self-help books and was curious about like, how do you rewire your brain when you're feeling really overloaded and overwhelmed? And at the time, of course, I didn't have the language for it, but I loved just listening to people and hearing about their story and how did they get to a place of safety and stability on their own terms or of others through a trusted resource, or for some people through medication. That was something that, like I said, at a young age, I was very curious about. I was often somebody who would, volunteer somewhere. And in addition to providing the service, I want to talk to you, like, what's going on? How did we get here? And how do you manage every day? And just hearing a lot of those stories just kind of naturally pulled me into being an advocate for social policy, particularly for housing. So stabilizing other people's housing and making sure other people had access to safe and affordable housing. And then taking it a step further, evaluating programs. What is actually working? What's not working? How can we support people, or the leaders, if you will, of these programs, make sure that they're not only good stewards, but also actually seeing the outcomes that they're anticipating, given all the resources that they have. And so it just so happened that a lot of the programs that I was evaluating, a lot of the programs that I was advocating for, a lot of the interventions I was advocating for were all in this space around behavioral health.
Mm.
In addition to the housing and wraparound services, we always came back to behavioral health, mental health, emotional well-being. How do you keep the space safe for people to even trust you? Because you can have a state-of-the-art
Yes.
facility, clinic, housing center, whatever. If people don't trust you, if people don't feel safe in there, if it's creating more trauma, more harm than good, you're really just going to be sitting in a building.
Mm.
So that's kind of my journey. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to bear witness to people's recovery journeys.
Mm. It's interesting. What's I want to come back to because for me, um, growing up, we say in the hood in the projects, it felt like there was really no time
Mhm,
to focus on mental health. We just had to constantly keep going, especially growing up with my mom and my little sister. It was really hard. And, as a kid, you can see kind of the struggles of the parent, just like the stress that
mhm,
comes from everything that was happening in particular.
yeah.
And what was interesting for me was that I really didn't realize the really like you would hear like, oh, we know we need to um, try counseling
Mhm,
or as a family, and it was something that we just didn't do. Our counseling was going to church, and at that time, you know,
mhm,
it probably worked for my mom in some form of capacity, which I think that's one way
mhm.
of continuing having some sort of mental health. Um, but for me, it was different, and I didn't really get into mental health till I want to say uh, graduate school, which is pretty late because I went through undergrad and didn't realize until grad school that I needed to really see someone.
Right, right.
um,
A lot of us, that's true for a lot of us.
yeah, and my family, we just didn't. Um, we didn't look at mental health. We didn't. We don't. We just didn't tell our business, right, to
Yep.
to strangers. So it was like we keep it in the family. We handle it, or we pray. We go to church. We
Mhm,
talk it out, and it just felt like nothing was working. And
mhm,
I would love to hear also just like what's what are some things you would I guess what from your experience of doing it so long and going
mhm,
back to the trust part,
mhm,
how can you speak to like kind of like the reasonings why people of color in
mhm.
particular have such a hard time trusting
Yeah,
or people in general, but and women of color as well,
yeah.
trusting to talk about their problems to someone they don't know.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge what you just shared. I think that's part of the issue, right? Um, there is so much shame that we've even internalized in our own communities and in our own families that sort of just gets perpetuated. Um,
Mm,
and it sends this message that needing this additional help is a weakness.
mm,
It doesn't come across as I'm investing in myself, and this is actually a strength. It's you should be doing this. You should be praying. You should be able to handle this on your own. And that comes from a long legacy, right? Of legitimate reasons to keep things in the family because there aren't that many institutions that have centered our well-being and cared about us, right? So it makes sense that over time we have internalized this message that at the end of the day we have each other's back because that is actually true, particularly in this country, right? And then when you think about the realities of families being separated. And you think about the heavy presence of police and of other kinds of institutions that don't always center Black families being put back together.
Mm.
It's more of a fear and a legitimate concern. And, I can say from my own personal experience, even in high school, I first came to therapy by way of crisis intervention. And
Mm.
no conversation around, this is a therapeutic conversation. We want to offer you skills. We want to offer your mother skills. It was more of, criminalizing my mom, that there was an assumption of neglect. There was an assumption of abuse. There was an assumption that I would be better off outside of my family unit. Right. And so if that's sort of our entryway into therapy, it makes sense that we look at this with a lot of skepticism. So I just want to just kind of center the reality that we didn't just make this up. It didn't come from a place of nowhere or just like chronic neuroses. It makes a lot of sense. And the reality also, to add to that, is unfortunately there isn't a lot of culturally appropriate, responsive treatment that's available to us.
Mm.
The American Psychiatric Association recent data says that there's only about 2% of practicing psychiatrists that are Black, and about 4 for psychologists who are actually providing care. So when you that disparity in terms of numbers,
yes,
there's no wonder that a lot of Black people, particularly Black women, don't feel like we have a safe place to land. If I'm going to you for care, if I have to be really focused on whether or not you're going to separate my family versus listening to me, I'm probably not going to go.
Mm.
And I'm not at all saying that there aren't instances where places like, Child Protective Services needs to intervene and make sure that a child is safe. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is people, families need to be listened to and looked at in a holistic sense. And we need to be curious about what tools are missing for them to manage their household before we assume abuse and neglect, before we assume that someone is causing harm intentionally.
Yeah.
Because often we're, generationally dealing with a lot of trauma that has been passed down. And we have to interrupt that with new ways of being, new ways of doing. And I think that it is the responsibility of clinicians to provide those tools and to be curious about what's missing. So that was a long way of saying I understand where you're coming from with that. And I think some of the barriers are really around just a lack of culturally appropriate care in the medical community. There's a lot of legitimate distrust in the medical community that's not even just about mental health. Often we're not listened to in general when we have aches and pains and concerns. And it doesn't matter even your income. Of course, it's even more difficult and bleak for those of us with lower incomes, for example. But even, celebrities who have a lot of money, like, Serena Williams, for example, really fought for her life and was not listened to by her own doctors, right? So we're not even talking about income anymore. We're talking about just a reality of racism that says my pain is not important and what I'm saying is not important. Whole point of therapy is to be heard.
Yeah. Yes. And what's when you were talking, it made me think about like from what and even just what you've experienced, what are some things that people just don't they still miss, they overlook, when it comes to women of color and mental health that people are just still getting wrong, and they're not listening. And I would love for the viewers to really understand in regards to whatever profession that they may be in or whatever, but this is where you're still getting it wrong, and here we go again. Because when I was watching what Simone Biles and
Mhm.
and all of the wonderful women of color who are athletes say, I cannot do this. I
Mhm.
need to take care of my mental health. What is it? Just thinking about that though, in general, like what are we? People are still getting wrong and not
Yeah.
listening to in regards
Yeah.
to that.
I think one of the things that we're still getting wrong is just because we're performing well, just because we're carrying ourselves with a lot of professionalism and excellence, doesn't mean that we are not human, doesn't mean that we don't still need a break, doesn't mean that we need time off. I think that oftentimes, and this is a gift and a curse, but Black women, Black people, we are taught you got to be excellent no matter what. Don't let anyone see you sweat. But underneath that, there is still pain. There is still a need to take a break. And we unfortunately don't get that space, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think another thing that we're not getting right is that we're all experts over our own lived experiences.
Mm.
And I think that it's really a disservice to not only the people who are in our care. I think, as I said earlier, it's definitely an honor to bear witness to people's recovery journeys. I don't think we take that seriously. We
Mhm.
enter the space as the expert and pointing the finger, and it's very top down. There's a hierarchy. Um, and the reality is, therapy is very collaborative. It's not going to go well if I'm just pointing the finger and telling my clients what it is that they need to be doing. I have to hear them, and I have to collaborate with them on some type of care, some kind of treatment plan that is going to make sense not only for them and their realities, but their actual lives.
Mm.
It may not make sense for me to tell my client who has 3 children, right, and works full time and a part time job with a seasonal job on top of that, that she needs to go to yoga 4 days a week. That's probably not going to make sense. Right. And so we need to, that would be my main thing, is that we need to learn that people are actually experts of their own lived experience. We need to honor and really value the opportunity to bear witness to somebody sharing with them everything that they're going through, being vulnerable and discussing their past, their trauma, and their needs, because that is not easy for anyone. And I think we also need to learn how to listen with curiosity and with empathy.
Mm. So I know I'm gonna jump to something else, but I really because you're amazing, this, and you know how much I love you.
So are you. Thank you. I love you back.
So our institution has I would say this. I have had the privilege and honor of being in community and being in a relationship and continuing being in a relationship um, with some amazing women of color that have left the institution that I work at, but also that are currently here. And one of the things is that I hear across the board is um, the blatant disrespect
Yeah.
that women of color on this campus encounter from their supervisors, whether they're white women or white men,
Hmm.
and that those particular women of color have been doing the work in particular of trying to make it work, right?
Hmm.
When, in my opinion, they haven't, from what it sounded like, they're not doing anything wrong, right? And um, I guess I would love your insight, advice on from an educational perspective from the institution, higher education, and what we know statistically in regards to how women of color are treated just in general from students, faculty, staff. Um, what would you what advice would you give them, and would you tell those that are supervising women of color in particular, the things that they need not to do and to be aware of what they're doing that's inappropriate?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that comes to mind as you were speaking, Q, is, we talk a lot about microaggressions. We talk a lot about things just sort of subtly, covertly happening. But the reality is that it is a lot of blatant disrespect, right? I think some of the things that I really hear from a lot of my clients who are women of color is just feeling invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling like people are talking past them and they only want them in the room to say that they had a person of color in the room.
Mm.
And they might even pay you accordingly. So we don't even need to get into that level.
Okay.
Pay equity, but that's a whole different discussion. But for even my clients who are paid, appropriately for their time and services, they're not recognized for it.
Mm.
And I think that, I think it's Zora Neale Hurston who said that, one of the biggest hurts or crimes is like bearing an untold story inside of you.
Mm.
Did not misquote one of my I really hope I didn't. I hope that was Zora Neale Hurston. It makes sense because she was a writer. But I think that just to be able to sit with all of your brilliance, to be able to sit with all of your passion for the work that you're doing, the work that you were hired for,
yes.
Completely benched time and time again is something that a lot of my clients, again, who are women of color, have talked about. I think another thing is not valuing the power of having a workforce that is diverse. It's not just about, we met some EEOC requirements or, we're doing the right thing so we can get access to this grant funding, because now grant makers are starting to be a lot more mindful about who they're giving money to and, asking what does your workforce look like in terms of demographics. But it's not just checking those boxes. It's actually understanding, being curious about what is the value of having a diversity of thought on my team.
Mm.
And if you can really internalize, understand, and appreciate that, then there would be a lot less confusion, right, about who needs to be speaking, who needs to be contributing. I think another reality is, we talk a lot about having a seat at the table.
Yep.
It's great to have a seat at the table, but am I authorized once I'm there?
Mm.
And I think that's something that, again, a lot of us are dealing with. So I think one of my main pieces of advice would be to be very curious about and take seriously the value of having a diverse workforce, a diverse team, and make sure that everybody who you went out of your way to hire is empowered to contribute in ways that they signed up for. I think that is really important. And then kind of going back to what I said earlier around, this idea of Black excellence and, having this standard of professionalism, a smile on your face, I think that is just how a lot of us present. The reality is that there are still spaces, more often than not, where our range is deemed unacceptable. So it's not just that we were taught that we have to be excellent at all costs. Our range isn't accepted. And so it's often difficult for us to have the same kinds of moments that our white counterparts would have. I will tell you, and this is before I became a therapist full time, I was in a meeting and someone, a white woman, was screaming and cursing in a meeting. And I made a look, and I will never forget this, Q. I made a face, and, I guess despite my professionalism, despite my diplomatic way of speaking across differences, that was unacceptable. And I would end the meeting, right? I'm feeling a lot of anger coming toward me. I didn't open my mouth, but I did have a responsive look, I guess, at someone who was shouting in a meeting that I felt was very inappropriate. And, I didn't use any curse words. I didn't raise my voice at anyone, but my presence, my, I guess, look of disapproval felt angry.
Mm.
Trope. We know that trope very well.
Yep.
Right? Of the angry Black woman, the angry brown woman, that has to go.
Yeah.
That has to go. And not just by way of being politically appropriate, it has to go because it's wrong. It's unfair. And again, you're telling me that even though I'm here, even though I'm at the table, I can't fully show up in my range. You can.
Mm.
So that has its own mental health costs.
Mm. That's powerful. Just that. Want to be at the table, but I can't show up fully. But you can.
But you can. You can.
Wow.
And so I think that, it is really the responsibility of hiring managers, HR, for people to really go beyond the requirements, right?
Yeah.
What makes sense? What does a workforce team need to look like so we can, be appropriate? But like, are you being intentional about making sure that everybody who is there is able to show up fully?
Mm.
Body has not only just a soft place to land, because hopefully we all have space to manage things outside of work, but are there ways in which you're allowing some people to have their range and not allowing it for others? Because, and it's really baked into a lot of our teams. And so I hope that whomever's listening has the ability to really kind of curate a team that you think about that. It may sound really basic, but I think these solutions don't have to be super complicated and lofty.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one way to really kind of zero in on your work culture.
So and the reason I'm hitting on this is because this constantly becomes like a really big issue across different departments across our campus. What would you say for those who are in working environments or in a department where it's toxic enough to where it's almost seeming to where they're walking on pins and needles?
Yeah.
And we're talking about, definitely people of color here, wanting to deal with it is just who they are, having to seclude themselves and put their head down and do the work. I mean, at this point, to me, it feels like you need, for your own mental health, like, and it's easier said than done when it comes like, it's time for you to like start looking elsewhere. But I would love to hear your advice on that, because there's still cases here where it's in certain departments where it's a little, I'm concerned as a friend. I'm concerned as a person of color, looking at other people of color having to deal with white management in particular being disrespectful, the microaggressions, not validating any of their experiences, particularly the women of color. I mean, where do they go? What is your suggestion, I guess, when it gets to that kind of toxicity?
Well, I've been there before.
Yeah.
And I think absolutely go where you are celebrated and not tolerated.
Yeah.
And I know that might not be, financially speaking, we're in a pandemic still, so that may be easier said than done for some people. But I just want to kind of like censor that. People who are creating this toxicity, these are often the same people who want to create all these other coalitions and committees and DE&I and these work groups and alliances. And I think one of the issues with that, although I love that energy and I love that prioritization, one thing is people who need to be leading those efforts are trained, right? Not just people who embody those differences, and therefore they're like somehow the expert. People actually went to school, become DEI experts. People actually went to school and studied critical race theory, things like that, to operationalize in workplace practices. So I think, really put your money where your mouth is. If this is a priority for you, you need to pay the experts so that one, you can get the apologies.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, okay, cool. I have some background noise, but one, so that you can make sure you're optimizing and getting the best quality of care and support and practices possible, right? Your environment, in your case, the university. But the other way, you don't want to put that burden on the very people who are being oppressed.
Yes,
And
yes.
often we do that. And it's a volunteer. It's a based program, right? All of these are volunteer-based programs. These are things that you're asking me to do. One, I'm not the expert. All I can tell you is my own experience, which I am the expert over. But two, you're not paying me. And three, often you're not empowering me again, right? You're not empowering me to actually be a decision maker. So, I've experienced this a lot from my own personal experience, from talking to clients, especially, over the past year and a half. There have been all kinds of programs, all kinds of volunteer-based structures that are put in place so that universities can do a better job, right? So that colleges can do a better job, so that workplaces can do a better job. And so you have a coalition of people who are volunteering, who are expressing their pain, who are coming up with maybe some really practical ideas, but they don't have any power to implement any of it. Getting these so-called safe spaces that aren't really appropriate, because one, they can't be therapeutic because you don't have a clinician in the space. You don't have any objective person in the space who can help facilitate the conversation in a way that really honors where people are coming from. And then two, you're having me come up with all of these strategies that, sure, that might be dope, but who's going to implement it? I don't have access to any decision. These are all wonderful ideas and book clubs and things like that. I get it. But at the end of the day, how is this being translated into an actual policy that other people who are causing me this stress, right, knowingly or unknowingly, actually have some accountability? So before you create all these structures and add all this extra unpaid labor and emotional labor for people who are being impacted by the toxicity, you got to be really deliberate about what are our outcomes going to be? And what are we going to allow these people to actually decide, if anything? If this is not going to translate into a policy, into some kind of accountability structure, then what are we really talking about here? So that is coming from a very frustrated, real place.
And it is. And it's interesting because the first episode, with Aaron Jones, which is the part one, and, I talked about, working in DEI, and I've been doing it for a while, even as a work study student in undergrad, and fell in love and, doing the work and doing DEI work is one of the most stressful jobs in higher ed that I have ever encountered. And I've taught, and when I first taught, I'm like, wow, this is a lot. And then I got into DEI, which what I wanted to do. And then I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Every time you feel like you're going a step forward, you're going like 3 steps back. Then you think you go 2 steps forward, then you go 4 steps back. Then you're trying to move forward and you got haters over here. Then you're looked at as a radical. Then you're looked at as this.
Yeah.
And, and then people wonder why people of color in higher ed always is looking to leave. People don't just want to leave a job. They leave their bosses.
That's a really good distinction. Yep.
It's not, people can stay in a job till when they know it's their time to move on. But I just, I've been doing this now for a while and I'm just like, I don't know how much longer I can carry the institution on my shoulders,
Mm.
most of the white folks, that just don't ever want to get it, things not really coming in the direction that it should. And I'm not saying we haven't done great things, we have, but
Yeah.
there's how we like to I'm trying to think of what my grandma would say, beating around the bush, is what is what my
Hmm.
like you just beating around the bush and we still haven't gotten to the root of why people are pissed. And
Hmm.
so it just makes me think about all the great things I know we've done in our department with me and my supervisor, but also just not getting to the core and that we're just fluttering,
Yeah.
if that makes fluttering around and not getting to the core of it. And I'm, it makes me think about DEI work in higher ed. And I'm like, people of color are like, we're exhausted. I just
Big exhausted.
exhausted. Like, I don't even understand. Like, just in general across everywhere who's
Yeah.
doing his work, everywhere. And it's
Hmm.
really exhausting. So I'm sorry to go on a tangent, but I definitely wanted
No.
to say that because I'm like, I love DEI work, but doing it in higher ed is a dangerous
Yeah.
situation. And I'm going to say it again, it is dangerous to do DEI work in higher ed because it's either you're going to like what I'm going to do and say, or you're not. Either my job is going to be on the line, or maybe not. But the maybe yes
Yeah.
is more higher than no. And
Absolutely.
so yeah, and it's definitely rough, and that's played into just my mental health, and also the women of color here on campus that I truly care about that have shared different experiences with me, with supervisors and things like that, and it's inappropriate, and I
Yeah.
just think that if they don't get it together, people are going to leave, and the worst thing you want is word of mouth. Word of mouth
Hmm.
is the fastest thing of any kind of advertisement and information being
Yeah.
disseminated. Like it's just
Period. Period.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just had to say that. Yeah.
And I'm glad you did say that, Q, because I think one of the other things is, as we're talking about just the danger of it, I think people underestimate how violent it,
Yes.
to be in that space where you are an expert not only of your own lived experience, but you went to school for this. You have been teaching. You
Yes.
are you are there intentionally,
Yes.
right? Like you are not new to this work. You are true to it. To be in that space where you're constantly disregarded and then also being pulled in so many different directions because people, um, your family, right? People who look like us are needing support. They're feeling violated all day, every day. So you end up wearing multiple hats. Then, when you have your white counterparts also pulling you in and asking you with a lot of sincerity and tears in their eyes, like, help me be a better white person, help me be a better ally, that also is taxing and exhausting.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the sincerity, but I think people don't realize, and as a queer Black woman in particular, I think people don't realize how overwhelming it is to be told constantly that I need to learn how to interact with you as if I'm like a person that comes with special care instructions or something. I'm
Mm,
like you. Like,
mm.
respectful, don't be a problem. You know, no one taught me how to necessarily be polite. No one taught me how to, not intrude upon people's boundaries. No one taught me necessarily how to not talk over people. This is something that I censor things like respect and compassion as a value. And so I work on it. That's
Mm.
that I work on. I care about people feeling respected. And so I work on that. And I'm open to feedback. If someone tells me, because there's no one size fits all. If someone tells me, hey, that crossed the line, Sade, that was a little problematic for me, I'm not going to then question you. I'm going to say, I apologize. That wasn't my intent, but I apologize. And I'm going to actively work to make sure that doesn't happen again. Because I care about you as a person.
Mm.
I'm not going to go out of my way, spinning my wheels, wasting more of your time telling you why I'm not problematic.
Mm.
Because that's then invalidating you. And that's what happens a lot. And not to speak for you, Q, but I think that's part of why this work is so hard as well. Because you're asking me to do this job, you're paying me to do this job, but yet you're constantly undermining me at every moment. When I try to give you feedback, when I try to show up and do what you're asking me to do, you're spending way more time trying to defend yourself than make a correction within your power.
Yes. And and this is just my lived truth and experience, and it hasn't been all bad, but I know that there's been a lot of moments where it hasn't been good. And that stays with a lot of people of color, in particular when it comes down to doing this kind of work. And before we wrap up though, I just would love, one, I'm happy that now the campus will be able to experience you how I experience your awesomeness. Is, what are some kind, loving parting words you would love to just impart on our women of color here in general on campus that you would just want them to take away?
I would like to say you are amazing. You do not have to do anything else to be amazing. It just already is, and it's a fact. I would also say that your job is your job. It is not your identity. And I think that's complicated for a lot of us who care about the work that we do and who made so many sacrifices to be where we are. If things aren't right at our jobs, it somehow feels like it's a reflection on us. And I just want to challenge us to try to create a little more separation between the human doing and the human being, what we do and who we are. We can't control a lot of things that are happening in our job. We can control how we show up in our job. We can control what we contribute. But when people refuse to see us and refuse to see and hear those who look like us, that's not our responsibility. We can hold space, but we also deserve that separation. We deserve recovery. We talked a week or so ago about like self-care and not the self-care that's commercialized, but like actual time, deliberate time to recover, right? To rejoice, to celebrate who you are and your accomplishments, to tap into your community, to rest, to actually be in your body, whatever that looks like, in whatever ways it feels nourishing. It's really important that we just take off our job hats for a moment, because they're not gonna, if we're in a toxic environment, they're never gonna give to us what we're putting in. And always having that hat on is sort of setting us up to fail. Another thing that I want to say, because I cannot get off of this call without saying it, it was actually my sister, Dr. Maya Angelou. It just came to me, who said that the biggest acne is bearing an untold soul within you. That was not Zora Neale Hurston. It's important. I have shared this before, but like also resisting perfectionism. Like, yes, Black excellence is real. Yes, we are amazing. We are dynamic. And we can do a lot of things with not that much support, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it needs to be, right? We're built differently. In terms of just our resilience and what we've had to do, but we're still human beings. And so even though we had to endure a lot and we had to be resilient, that doesn't mean that we continue to have to be in that space as if we're somehow different from everyone else. We just haven't had a choice in the matter. And so I think it's really important for us to take a break and to resist perfectionism and allow ourselves to make mistakes, allow ourselves to say, I can't do this right now. I won't do it right now, to have boundaries. Even if it's your good sis who maybe had a really horrible interaction with someone, you need to make sure that you're good first.
Mm,
I know sometimes, particularly as caretakers, we've talked about this before, Q,
yes.
we feel like we have to all the time. We have to be pulled in. We have to support and aid someone else. But then what does that leave for you at the end of the day?
Yeah.
So be really honest with yourself about like, do I have the capacity in this moment? And on the flip side, as that good sis, ask your friend, ask your family, your family colleague, do you have time for this? Because I really need to go off. Safe space. When your good sis closes your door,
Yeah.
we all know those moments, right? But I think it's a two-way street of us being honest about our capacity. And, it's okay to say, you know what, girl, I love you, but I don't have it right now because I got a meeting with her in 10 minutes. Right? And please, please, please go out of your way. And I hate to say this, but it's just practical. Go out of your way to find a clinician who is going to listen to you, who is going to support you, who is curious about your life and your lived experiences. There are so many resources. We're talking in particular today about Black women. Therapy for Black Girls has an entire directory across the United States where you can filter in things like your insurance and your needs and your location, and you can find someone. And also be okay with shopping around, right? Just like you might shop for a good pair of shoes or that outfit that you want to wear, shop around. I think sometimes because it is such a new concept, sometimes we feel beholden to the first person we speak to. Um,
Mm,
and even if the person looks like you, right? There are things called fit. There
mm,
and so shop around, have some questions in advance. If you don't know what those questions are, again, go to resources like Therapy for Black Girls, and try to come up with a few things so that you feel like already in the first meeting that you're in a space of collaboration and not being told what to do, because that's going to really determine what your care is going to look like.
mm.
Yeah. So those are some parting words that I have. I just appreciate you for having me. If you ever want me to come back, I am more than willing. I would do anything you ask. I just love working with you and supporting you. And I think to those who are in a position to change the toxic realities and environments, just really consider, are the people that you have on your team and your workforce, are they all empowered to explore their range? And do you really understand and value the importance of having a diversity of thought on your team, or is it just a box to click? Because if it's just a box to click, you may as well just not have them there, and you can deal with those realities however you want to deal with those realities. It's more harmful to bring them there under the guise of caring about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you're really just providing lip service.
Listen, y'all heard it from the best. Okay. The game. I mean, thank you, Juan, for just taking the time. You know how much I love and care about you, and you just do amazing work. You definitely know I'm bringing you back. Um, you
I'd
already
love to be
know.
back.
You already know. And I just want to let everyone know that's listening, that took the time to listen to this particular episode, to really specifically, even for those who are non-POCs, like, listen. And for those who are POCs, especially on this campus, just letting you know, I hear you. I'm advocating for you. I'm gonna fight for you, no matter what, and just do what you need to do for you.
Yeah,
That's really the lesson here.
absolutely. Absolutely. Develop a ritual of care for yourself.
Mm. And for that, it is so amazing to have my wonderful sister friend today. And thank y'all for listening to the Unheard Outsider today. Engage in self care in the way you need to. Um,
Mhm.
and just have a really great day. Thanks for tuning in. And we hope you tune in next week. You all have a great, great day.